Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Thursday, October 13th. We're doing a day early this week, so we are able to have our great guest, Mark Z. Barabak, return, political columnist for the LA Times. How you doing, partner?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, we've been focused here very much on our very hyper-local school board races, but I understand there's a whole other world going out there in the state and the nation about control of Congress, obviously coming up in the midterms. And it seems like there have been several rounds of conventional wisdom on this. The beginning of the year, it was going to be a Republican wipeout.
Yeah.
And then with the Dobbs Roe v. Wade decision, oh, well, maybe Democrats can hold the House. And now it seems to be kind of swinging back maybe to the mama bear thing in between that. But I know you're going to help us make sense of it, but I want to start with the Senate. And your column this morning is on the Senate race in Nevada, and between the Democratic incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto and the Republican challenger. Is he still the Attorney General, Adam Laxalt?
No, he preceded Cortez Masto. He was AG. I think he was done in 19, ran for governor in 18, left office in 19, but he succeeded preceded Cortez Masto as Attorney General.
Okay. Well, anyway, that it's a very interesting column, and you make the case certainly for why Nevada is an important one to watch. Why is it so significant?
Well, a couple of things, just mathematically speaking, to go over the map a bit. I mean, you're right. The Dobbs decision really has given Democrats hope, energized their base. Seemingly, Democrats outperformed, quote, quote, in several House races. There was that Kansas referendum where abortion really drove turnout. So, that's given Democrats optimism. The other thing that's given them cause for optimism is the quality of some of the candidates that Republicans have nominated. I mean, Republicans to a large extent sort of sublet their candidate recruitment to Donald Trump. And as a result, you got a lot of people who might have been worshipful of Trump weren't very good candidates. I mean, not to say all of them are going to lose, but, just to take a couple places, North Carolina is competitive, Ohio is competitive. Those are races that shouldn't even be on the board right now. And if I had to guess, I think Republicans will end up prevailing there. But the fact that Republicans are spending money in October in Ohio is not a good thing for them. And then you have people like Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania, who's a really lousy candidate, running against John Fetterman, who's having issues. Arizona was at the top or near the top of states where Republicans thought they might flip. They nominated this, Blake Masters, who, to quote myself, is 36 and acts and behaves a lot younger than that. He's a really lousy candidate. Mark Kelly's probably going to win that race. New Hampshire, another place that looked really good for Republicans at the beginning of the year. They nominated this election-denying Trumper who has made Maggie Hassan look like a pretty safe bet for re-election. So if you want to narrow the map down, let's give, notwithstanding everything I just said about Mehmet Oz, if Republicans hold serve and hang on in Wisconsin and hang on in Pennsylvania, and the Democrats can hold on to Arizona and then Georgia, where your good friend Herschel Walker is running, and need we say more. So if both sides hold serve, Nevada's the decider. And then the other reason, I do different columns, sometimes I'm more opinionated than others. And this was one where I really felt strongly. The other thing that I think is significant about Nevada is voters there really have a chance to send a message. There are a lot of candidates who sort of opportunistically, cravenly jumped on the Trump denial election bandwagon to help them win a Republican primary. As I said in my column, Adam Laxalt didn't just hop on the bandwagon. He helped construct it. He has been called the face of the big lie in Nevada. He was Trump's co-chairman in the state. He had press conferences making a lot of wild, false, wrong allegations, undercutting the integrity of voting in that state. He filed a bunch of groundless lawsuits. So to my mind, and as I said in the column, I mean, something like that should be disgraced, not rewarded with a seat in the Senate.
Yeah, but it's an interesting matchup because it really does kind of put the Dobbs decision and choice and election denying and the future of democracy issue, we can call that an issue, up against inflation, crime,
Right.
immigration, which are the
Right.
Republicans' big issues.
Right, right. Nevada, it's very interesting. I mean, I've been going to Nevada for a really, really long time. And I covered a lot of races, went over there a lot during the Great Recession, and was going, to these subdivisions, in North Vegas that literally had tumbleweeds blowing down them. I mean, Nevada was just a basket case. And what was interesting to me this last trip over, I'm driving around, I'm seeing a lot of construction cranes. I'm going to places that have a lot of "we're hiring" signs up. So the economy is doing way, way better than it was. And certainly better than in 2008, certainly better than it was during the pandemic. What you have is sort of an overhang. The strip shut down, tourism ground to a halt, and that's Nevada's lifeblood. So what you have is a lot of folks who may be doing better now, but they're not where they were before the pandemic, and they're paying. It's funny. I pulled up at the pump yesterday, refilled my rental car, and I think it was $5.50 a gallon. I came with $6.50 in California, but $5.50 in Nevada is a lot. I mean, it's a very spread out state. So yes, you have sort of the wrongs of the big lie and the wrongs of January 6th that have receded in the minds of some folks who are more concerned about what's right in front of them, which is the inflation, fears of recession, crime. There was this horrible random stabbing attack on the Strip. So, again, tough climate. Nevada, just a couple more words about Nevada. Nevada is perceived as being a blue state, and they have voted blue in every presidential election for 20 or so years. But it's a very, very competitive state. I mean, it's a state that Democrats have won, but only by scratching it out on the ground. And that's their big hope, is they can do this again. Last thing, Harry Reid famously ran for re-election in 2010. Not a single poll showed him ahead. Any point during the race, he ended up winning. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, the other question I have about, just to close on Nevada, is one of the other narratives that's out there is the way that Hispanic and Latino voters are moving to the Republican Party, and that's a big issue in Nevada, is it not? Because of
I think
industry.
Yeah, I think the concern in Nevada, and I can't let it pass without mentioning, you have an election denier, a QAnon crazy, and Jim Marchand, who's running for Secretary of State. And, if you want to talk about someone who could do some damage, right, put this guy in charge of the voting. But yeah, the problem, it's interesting. Kathleen Cortez Masto is the first Latina senator in U.S. history. Not doing great. Polls will show among Latinos, although a couple qualifiers, it's really hard to get a good sample. Who knows what the polls are showing, but she's definitely having to work really, really hard to make sure they turn out. And I think their Democrats' greater concern is not that a ton of Republicans are going to vote for Adam Laxalt. I think their concern, that a ton of Latinas are going to vote for Adam Laxalt. I think their big concern is that Latinos are just going to stay home and not vote at all. And if they don't, then Adam Laxalt could win.
Yeah. Has there been any recent state polling on that race?
Yeah, and it shows very, very close. And since we're getting a little weedy with Nevada, Nevada's a really hard state to poll in because so many people, a lot of people work in the gaming industry. A lot of people go to work at night, right? So it's really, really hard to get a good sample size. A lot of people work on the Strip. They work in casinos. They work at night. They sleep during the day. So that's just one of the things that makes Nevada a very, very difficult state to poll in. That said, generally speaking, the polls show it to be very, very close.
All right. Before we leave the Senate, I do want to talk quickly about a couple of these races you mentioned. So basically, again, to recap, it's 50-50 in the Senate and currently. And of course, Vice President Harris has the tie-breaking vote. So when you talk about holding serve, everybody wants to, the first priority is to keep those seats you have. But for the Democrats, Georgia was originally seen as a problem. Reverend Warnock, elected 2 years ago to complete an uncompleted term, was seen as pretty vulnerable. But then, as you say, they went with the Trump candidate, Herschel Walker. What's your sense of that one right now?
I mean, Herschel Walker is just a human train wreck of a candidate. I mean, it's just astonishing how bad he is and has been. I mean, just someone who clearly, and I can say this because I'm a columnist, just is not remotely fit for office. But he's got an R behind his name, and it's Georgia, and he is a legend from his Heisman Trophy winning years as a running back at the University of Georgia. So that can get him. I'm sorry, yeah, the Bulldogs. That can get him so far. What's been really interesting, we're seeing this in a few places. In our tribal age of politics, you see very, very, very little ticket splitting. But you're seeing a fair amount of ticket splitting in Georgia, and by that I mean you're seeing people. It looks like Republicans or Independents who are voting for Brian Kemp, the Republican, for governor, and for Warnock for Senate. And there again, you may have a case of folks simply staying home and not voting, which it would seem would benefit Warnock. One thing that should be said, though, there are several candidates running. Georgia is a state where you need to get 50% plus to win. So maybe someone ekes it out with 50%. I think more likely we're heading to a runoff. It'll be interesting to see. I was talking to someone who's very involved in Senate races around the country for one of these Democratic independent money groups who said that, if Georgia is just, an afterthought in the sense that we clearly know one part or the other is in control of the Senate, then it'll just be an afterthought. But if it comes down, if it is split down the middle and Georgia's the decider, it's like, choose your cliche, Katie bar the door. It's just going to be a ton of money, ton of interest. It's going to be like the current campaign on steroids times 10.
Yeah. And just on that Brian Kemp ticket splitting issue, he's running against Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, who I think originally was seen as someone who was going to do very well, but she kind of faded, huh?
Yeah, we've both seen this before. I mean, how close did Tom Bradley come against Duke Major the first time he ran? The second time, it was
close enough that the Chronicle elected him.
Sorry. Okay, well, let's use another example. But I mean, we see candidates who kind of catch lightning in a bottle. Beto O'Rourke is another one, right? Came amazingly close to beating Ted Cruz. Democrats got all excited. He's raising a ton of money, but I don't think he's going to beat Greg Abbott. Stacey Abrams is another one, lightning in a bottle. It's just really hard, to capture that lightning in a bottle twice. And you're right, Stacey Abrams was all that. Not looking so good this time.
Yeah. And it never ceases to amaze me how Democrats will just pour money into these things. I mean,
they do. The classic example is Amy McGrath. I think she collected, I don't know, many tens of millions of dollars so she could get absolutely waxed by Mitch McConnell. I mean, Democrats especially, I mean, look, both sides do it. I did a column some years back about, the phenomenal amount of money that Nancy Pelosi's Republican opponents have raised in San Francisco, right? Tens of millions of dollars, which was hopeless. And I called some of these voters around the country, and like someone in Georgia, I remember talking to upstate New York, said, "What are you thinking?" And it just gives people a certain satisfaction, but it's not very smart. It's not very cost effective. And I promise you, when Democrats wake up on, we might not know who's going to control the Senate on November 9th, but when they look back on this campaign, there may be a lot of regret that say they spent $25 million or $100 million on Beto O'Rourke when maybe 2 or 10 or 20 million of that could have helped. I'm just reaching in a hat. Could have helped Tim Ryan win in Ohio. So a lot of sort of thinking with people's guts and their hearts rather than using their heads.
Yeah. All right. And then the second Senate seat where the Democrats are trying to hang on. You mentioned Arizona. Mark Kelly, the incumbent, and Blake Masters, who might be the worst. He might be the worst of the whole lot. I don't know. I mean,
he's really he's done and said a lot of really foolish things. Mark Kelly has raised a ton of money. Has basically known from the get-go that he was going to face a very, very tough election. I was talking to Republican strategists in that state, and I can't remember the quote off the top of my head. They're trying to paint him as this crazy radical extremist, and this is a Republican talking. He said, it's really hard to paint the guy who had his hand on the throttle of the space shuttle as someone reckless and dangerous. But that's the playbook Republicans are using against him. I mean, it's very interesting. A lot of the spending that had gone into that race is now being pulled out of that race. Mitch McConnell's committee.
Peter
Peter
Thiel
Thiel.
is,
Yeah, he was Peter Thiel, the tech billionaire, libertarian conservative, basically propped up Blake Masters, got him elected. Mitch McConnell and folks went to him and said, "Hey, how do you feel about spending some more money?" At first, he said no. This is after Republicans pulled $10 million out of Arizona to prop up JD Vance in Ohio. Lately, it's been reported that Peter Thiel said to McConnell and company, "Okay, I'll pony up some money if you guys can match it." So far, they haven't. So it looks like he may be wisely realizing that, this is an investment that's going to go south. He's just not going to pour any more money down the drain after it.
yeah. And then to continue our election night viewing guide, the other, excuse me, Democratic Senate seat to keep an eye on is, as you mentioned, is New Hampshire. But that one, I mean, this guy, what is it? What's his name? Baldock?
Baldock, yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, he seems as goofy as General Flynn.
Yeah, an election denier, the whole 9 yards. Said some rather intemperate things, celebrating, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That one looks pretty safe. I mean, I've written about a couple other Senate races just very quickly. When we were talking, as you said at the top, there was a time we were talking about a Republican tsunami. Michael Bennett in Colorado, I even did a column that said basically, there's going to be bad, there's going to be awful, and then there's Democrats curled up in the fetal position whimpering. Bad would be losing the House, which it looks more likely than not is going to happen. But someone like Michael Bennett, if he was in danger, if he gets wiped out, that would have been your tsunami. The other one that was on the cusp, and Republicans are talking very optimistically about, was Washington State, where they have a really strong candidate, a candidate who, frankly, would probably win in a lot of places, but it's Washington State. And once the Dobbs decision came out, Patty Murray really leaned in the abortion issue, and that seems to have opened up some daylight for her.
Yeah. And then the two Republican seats where it appeared for a while that Democrats had a chance, but maybe not so much now, particularly Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson, the Republican, who is really, he was borderline for a while, then he crossed the border. It seemed like he was eminently beatable, but the Democrats nominated this defund the police guy.
Yeah, Mandela Barnes, Lieutenant Governor, African American. Republicans have really, really gone after him on crime. Ron Johnson, who really is what's a word I could use? Pretty awful. I can say that now because I'm a columnist. I mean, he's an election denier. He actually tried to seat alternate slate of delegates. So he's up to his neck.
On January 6th.
Yeah, he's up to his neck in the January 6th election denialism. He's a COVID crazy. I mean, all those things. The Milwaukee paper just had a editorial comparing him, saying he was the worst senator from Wisconsin since Joe McCarthy. But Barnes, I'm sorry, he's really leaned into the crime issue. They just pounded Barnes with a merciless onslaught of ads. It looks like he's been opening up some daylight. Now it's been reported that Barnes really wants to try and turn things around. He wants Obama to come campaign for him. It's interesting. He's actually talking about Biden and Kamala Harris coming to campaign for him, which is interesting because in places like Arizona and Nevada, it's like, Joe, here's your 10-foot pole. Go stand in the corner. We'll see him maybe in December or so. So it's interesting. He thinks, and that suggests to me what they really need, and what Mandela Barnes really does need would be a huge African American turnout, particularly in Milwaukee. It looks like that's kind of their last hope.
Yeah, and then in Pennsylvania, the shall we say unconventional Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman running against Dr. Oz, and Dr. Oz is running like the world's worst campaign. And anyway, he's from New Jersey, but then Fetterman had a stroke right at the end of the primary, and that looks like that issue is kind of getting some traction all of a sudden.
Yeah, that issue has gotten some traction. I mean, there are a lot of questions about Fetterman's health. And the other thing, again, is crime. I mean, Republicans have done the same thing. They've really pounded him on the crime issue. Fetterman sat on, as lieutenant governor, he sat on the state parole board. So, there's a bunch of people who he granted parole to, so they're going after him as soft on crime, the health thing. I mean, that's a very, very close race. But that was a race that for a time looked like Fetterman might be pulling away. But with the crime issue and the health stuff really coming to the fore, and what's really happened, Oz was took part in a really, really nasty Republican primary. Something like $20 million in negative ads dumped on his head. Mostly what we've seen, and the reason the race is tightening is because Republicans have come home. So, it's not like he's won a huge amount of crossover support. It's consolidating that Republican base. The question really comes down to, turnout on the Democratic side. Can John Fetterman get a big turnout in, Philadelphia among African Americans? Will suburban women, particularly animated by the abortion issue, show up? And how much does the crime issue cut into support?
Yeah, and then that's another one where you see some ticket splitting because the Republicans nominated this guy Mastriano,
Yes.
Mastriano, who's a real, I mean, he chartered buses for the January 6th thing to take.
Yeah, he's another guy up to his neck, and it's really interesting. And your millions, if not billions, of viewers will remember here in California. I even did a column about this. They executed the Gray Davis, Dick Riordan playbook. Some of the folks will remember how Gray Davis pretty much picked, or at least helped nudge Bill Simon to the nomination, the guy he wanted to face. We saw the same thing, and subsequently, a lot of stuff has been written about it. We've seen in other places, but Josh Shapiro, the Democrat, the state attorney general, put up an ad saying, basically, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it's said in so many words, if Mastriano is nominated, it'll be a win for Donald Trump, which a lot of Republicans were like, wow, sounds great. And so he got Mastriano as opponent. So yeah, another race, as you suggest, we're seeing a lot of ticket splitting. We're seeing a lot of folks who are voting for Josh Shapiro, who may end up voting for Mehmet Oz.
All right, and then just to close on the Senate, there's two open seats. You mentioned Ohio, which has gotten increasingly red. I mean, I have to say,
your home state, yeah,
and this J.D. Vance, who's just I mean, he just seems like such a fraud. I mean, he's a well-educated guy, and but he's talking down, it seems to me, to people all the time. But then Tim Ryan, who's a moderate Democratic congressman who actually challenged Nancy, I think, at one point for that.
He did. Yeah, it's interesting because J.D. Vance kind of disappeared over the summer. I mean, he didn't raise very much money, didn't make many appearances. Tim Ryan, if there was a letter open, he was there. So really hustling, running a really aggressive campaign. Ohio's a tough one for Democrats. I'm old enough to remember it's 2004, which was the state that decided that presidential election. And John Kerry only barely lost it after Democrats pulled the plug. And like I say, every election, it's like what do they do? What do they do, right? Because it's like it can be very, very close. It's just very, very tough. So Democrats, national Democrats, the party has done nothing to help Tim Ryan, who's raised a ton of money. And that's one where, like I said, if you see, J.D. Vance just barely scratching out a win there, I think there's going to be a lot of Democrats who will be kicking themselves. Why didn't we invest the money? Just a little bit might have pushed Tim Ryan over the top. I'm not saying he's going to lose, but I'm saying if he loses, again, people are going to look and say, why did we pour tens of $millions into Texas when maybe 10 million or so might have helped put Tim Ryan over the top?
And you have a similar situation in North Carolina in the soon-to-be Big and Tom Tillis seat, where was it Sherry Beasley? Is that her name? The former state Supreme Court justice, Democrat running against Ted Budd, who's I guess just kind of an anodyne Republican congressman.
Yeah, who got Trump support. So he's another Trump selection running. And yeah, that's another state. I've covered politics in the South enough to know it's like, it's like if you're backpacking, 5 to 6 to 7 to 8,000 feet foot level is one thing. It's like when you go from going from 8 to 12 or from 12 to 15 is a lot harder than going from 0 to 3 or 4. And, you can very easily see a Democrat in some of these southern states getting to 46, even 47, right? It's just really, really hard to make up that last thing. And, that's another race the Democrats really, I understand maybe they're putting a little bit of money into it, but that's another state where you sit down and you look at it, like I said, it's just really tough. You get to 45, okay, fine. You can maybe push it up to 47, even 48. It's just those last 2 percentage points that are really, really hard. If there's going to be, right, well, by definition, if we say something's going to happen, there's not going to be a surprise. But if there's going to be a surprise on the Senate side on election night, it could be in North Carolina, it could be in Ohio.
All right. All right. So we still feel the Senate very much competitive, less so, I guess, on the House at the moment.
Yeah.
Where all the great prognosticators have it, what, between 5 and 20, you were saying, pick up for the Republicans?
Yeah, just to set the table, Republicans need to pick up 5 seats to take control. And they got quite a ways there in 2020. People don't remember, perhaps, Republicans picked up more than a dozen seats in 2020, even though Joe Biden won. So Republicans set themselves up very nicely for this election cycle. They only need to pick up 5 seats, as I mentioned. Now, in Florida, the way the map was drawn, it was a very, very, very aggressive gerrymander. Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor, had a map sent to him. He tore it up. He wrote an even more partisan map. So Republicans could pick up 4 seats just in Florida, right? They need 5. They could get 4 in Florida alone. Now, of course, they've got to defend seats, including, we'll come to this, in California. So it's not like they win 4 in Florida, and pick up 1 somewhere else in the country. They're good to go. But they've got a very, very good running start coming off of 2020. And, people talk about a wave. I mean, to use a cliche, they don't really need, even just a little ripple will be enough for Republicans to take the House. Not to say it's in the bag, because, right, nothing ever is sure in life or politics. But if you're a betting man or woman or cat or dog, you'd have to put your money on Republicans taking over after November.
And when you look at the whole map, Democrats are defending more than they're on the offense here.
Yeah, I saw somewhere, and I don't have it lodged in my head, but of the competitive seats, by the Cook Political Report with our friend Amy Walter and Dave Wasserman, they calculated how many really truly competitive seats there are. And Democrats to hang on need to win something like 70% or more of them, right? So, it's pretty, it's not to say can't happen, but it's like, for Republicans, it's a layup. I'm not sure if I want to stick with that metaphor, I don't know what I would say Democrats have to do, but, they got to pick up, they got to win 70% of those competitive seats, which is a really, really tall order.
Right. And it seems like, and I don't, maybe I'm just getting this from national coverage, that maybe some of the steam is going out of the Dobbs thing in terms of motivating Democrats. Do you get that sense as you travel around?
It's hard to say, because I've seen that and I've heard some of the talk, but I have to tell you, not at all scientific. But when I was in Las Vegas earlier this week for the Laxalt Cortez Masto column, I was just, I went to Henderson and Summerlin, which are 2 more upscale suburbs of Las Vegas. And I was surprised how top of the mind abortion seemed for a lot of the folks, including this one woman who I quote in the article. My focus was January 6th, but she really talked about abortion and how she leans Republican in a lot of ways, which was very, very bothered. So, I'm very wary of polls, even more than I've ever been. It's just really, really hard to get a decent sample size. So many people just don't want to participate in polls or won't participate in polls. I mean, I don't know if the energy is dissipated or not, but I was struck by how many people, when I approached them, women in particular, brought it up unbidden.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And then, so if, just to extend the hypotheticals a little bit more, so if the Republicans do take the House, as all of the prognosticators seem to have a high level of confidence will happen, then we have the 3 most feared words in the English language, Speaker Kevin McCarthy. What will that mean? What will the Republican House look like? Because you got all these, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Bobbitt or Boebert running around.
Yeah.
And and McCarthy doesn't seem to. I mean, he just encourages him, if anything.
Well, it brings to mind, the old expression about buying a boat. The best day of buying a boat is the day you buy it. The second best day is the day you sell it. I think Kevin McCarthy's happiest day as Speaker, if he becomes Speaker, I think he will. I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't. But I think his happiest day as Speaker will be the day he wins the job, because I think after that's going to be all downhill from there. And how difficult it's going to be for him will depend. Is he going to have a margin of 2 seats? Is he going to have a margin of 20 seats? Is he going to have a margin of 40 seats? Right? If he has a 40-seat margin, which I seems pretty much outside the realm of possibility. But if he has a 25-seat margin or 30-seat margin, that's one thing. If he's got a 2-seat margin or a 3-seat margin, then yeah, then it's, the Matt Gaetzes are going to be holding them up, and the Boeberts are going to be holding up. And to the extent that there are any moderate Republicans left, they'll be holding up. So it's going to be a really, really difficult position he's going to be in, unless Republicans surprise everyone by just winning. If they get that red tsunami that it was talked about at the beginning of the year, it's one thing. But if, as it looks, it's going to be really, really close. Again, it's going to be one of those, watch what you wish for, because I don't know that Kevin McCarthy's speakership will be a very happy one.
Well, and then they had this press conference, quote unquote, the other day. McCarthy and some of the others, Republican leaders, rolled out the poor man's contract for America, or here's what our program's going to be, which seemed more like kind of a 2-page press release or something than anything. I mean, what do you see a Republican House focusing
on? Investigating and impeaching Joe Biden. I think, they've said as much. I think the January 6th committee is gone. They're going to dismantle that. There were comments made after the search warrant was served. I'm not going to say the raid on Mar-a-Lago. After the legally executed, approved by a judge, search warrant was executed.
Approved by a Trump judge.
On Mar-a-Lago, I think it was Kevin McCarthy or someone said to Merrick Garland, save all your records because, we'll see you on Capitol Hill. I think they're going to spend a lot of time investigating Hunter Biden, they talked about impeaching Homeland Security Secretary overseeing the border. I think we're in for a lot of investigation. I think you and I have talked about this often in the context of our senior, and I don't mean that pejoratively, United States Senator Dianne Feinstein, and how time has kind of passed her by, right? She was someone and remains someone, though, the choral fellow who believes in compromise and legislating. That's not where the Republican caucus is at these days. Excuse me, the Republican conference. It's the Democratic caucus in the House Republican conference. That's not where they're at. It's performative politics. It's Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's getting likes on Twitter. It's like, ginning up the base and small donors. So, you tell me how much excitement are you going to generate by passing something that's going to, regulate maritime maritime rules for shipping, in Santa Barbara, versus some outrage of the day that you can get, set people's hair on fire. So I think we're going to see.
It's interesting. I had this conversation with our Congressman Salud Carbajal. I had him on the show last week because he's, his entire brand is bipartisanship. He started out with a kind of a purple district. It's very blue now, but anyway, he's, how he's working across the aisle. And I said, what is that? How can you even say that? These people are all election deniers. And he pointed toward the Solutions Caucus or whatever it's called, and another one, the military, ex-military caucus, and he sent me the names, and his guy sent me the names, and I went down, and maybe there are 12 or 20 kind of moderate, still Republican House members who want to govern, as you say, but boy, the numbers are getting pretty small.
Right, and what's the in our political system, what's the incentive structure, right? To have your head down and pass some obscure piece of legislation that 12 people will have heard of, or to go on Fox or one of these right-wing channels and gin people up and, get yourself exposed and get a lot of likes on social media and get a lot of small donor people to send you money. We have this perverse incentive structure now. And again, it's outrage, it's performative politics, it's not getting stuff done. And I suspect that's a lot of what we'll see out of a Republican-run House.
Yeah, I guess the scariest thing I've seen about that in terms of projecting is, this story that, what they want to do is, kind of stage a default crisis so that they can cut Medicare and Social Security benefits. There are real stakes involved in all this stuff. People should
there are, and there's going to be another election in 2024. So if Republicans go too far, then folks will have a chance to vote him out. And I suspect that could very well happen. I suspect that, I don't know what's going to happen at the top of the ticket, but, if there's a Republican overreach, if they go too far, then there will be a backlash. And, the tenure of Kevin McCarthy will be a short one. And I don't suppose we'll have Speaker Pelosi again, a third time, but, then some Democrat who succeeds her will take over. And again, the Kevin McCarthy speakership will be a very short-lived one.
Yeah, Pelosi always plays it pretty close to the vest, but do you have any sense of if the Republicans do take the House, what she's going to do? Is she going to stick around as a minority member again? I don't.
I doubt. And look, she hasn't confided in me. I did a column. I think it ran last week. I was on the streets of our beloved San Francisco, your backdrop, talking to folks, and it was interesting. I found very, very mixed opinions. There were a lot of folks, including the person who was the lead of the column, was someone who said, "Love Nancy Pelosi. I've always voted for her, but this is the last time. Time for her to move on. New blood, et cetera, et cetera." I got a lot of that, and then I got folks who were like saying, "Well, hold up. She's been hugely effective for San Francisco. Let's keep her in there." I mean, the bottom line is, as long as Nancy Pelosi draws a breath, she will hang on to that seat. She can be reelected into her hundreds if she keeps running. I don't know. I would be very, very surprised that she would stick around as the member of the minority. And let's not forget, she made a pledge. Well, she told me in an interview I did in 2018, she mentioned seeing herself as a transitional figure, saying that, she was, would be a bridge to the future. She had things to do, grandchildren to love, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Shortly after that, she made a pledge so she could be reelected speaker that she was only going to do a couple more terms. That gets you through, 2022. If Democrats defied the odds and made pundits, quote, quote, look like fools, which, they don't need a whole lot of help. But anyway, and they hung on to the House, might she make a case that, look at what it, I mean, she's been a phenomenal fundraiser. She's raised over $1.25 billion with the BE dollars. She's been phenomenal. Might she try and make the case that, hey, let me stick around? She could, but I just think there's just a really strong impetus. There's a lot of pent-up ambition. Long way of saying, I think, when you have me back on your show, if you have me back on my show next spring, probably sooner than that, I think Nancy Pelosi will have retired. There's talk about her being appointed ambassador to Italy. That's the big rumor. I don't see her serving in the minority. And even if Democrats win, I think she may choose to move on.
Yeah. Well, you and I both covered that 1987 special election when she was first elected. It'd be great. I mean, this is going to be another great special election. I mean, starting with her daughter,
it'll be a phenomenal election. And the question is really going to come down to, you're right. There's a lot of, I mean, look, this is the first time that seat's come open in 35 years, and you and I both know, the competition in San Francisco. It's like someone once likened it to the crabs and those buckets on Fisherman's Wharf, right? I mean, it's a cutthroat town. People love politics. I love covering San Francisco politics. The race to succeed Nancy Pelosi will be a great one and a fun one to watch and to cover. And you're right, there's a lot of people want to run. One of them is her daughter, Christine. To me, the big question will be, I don't think on paper, as we sit here today, Christine Pelosi would be the strongest candidate. So, does Nancy Pelosi think with her heart and back her daughter, or think with her head and just sort of back off? And here's something interesting. I was reporting this one time, and you're right, you and I both covered that race. And I was talking to someone, this was like a year or so ago, and I was talking about Pelosi, and as revered as she is, and I mean, I likened her, and I don't think it's an exaggeration. She's almost as much a fixture in San Francisco now as Coit Tower and the Golden Gate Bridge. Very loved, very revered, but there are still people who are really, really resentful that the, quote, Burton machine pushed them down her throat, right? This is 30 years later. So the idea that Nancy Pelosi is going to just anoint her daughter, and everyone's going to say, okay, that's not that's not how San Francisco politics works.
All right, let me ask you quickly. I know you're not covering these races, but just kind of if you hear anything from your colleague, there's 5 or 7 House seats in California that are kind of people are watching. But in our area, there's a lot of interest in the 25th. Mike Garcia, the Republican incumbent, and Christy Smith, who's run, I don't know, 13 or 14 times. No, just this is only the 3rd time, but that district went more Democrat. But you were saying you're hearing the Dems pulling money out of there.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, I can't remember if it was the Democratic Congressional Campaign Fund or one of the supportive groups, but I did hear that maybe they're pulling back on that race, which is a very curious decision and an interesting one, because that is a seat the Democrats should win. I don't know if they're diverting resources elsewhere, and they may, ads come and go, they go up, they come down. But I can tell you, Democrats have never been very bullish, fairly or not, on Christy Smith. Came very close to winning the last time, lost by only 300 votes. There wasn't terrific enthusiasm around her running another time. You would think that this is California with the abortion issue out front the way it is, and she's really been pounding, Mike Garcia. He's an election denier. To his credit, I did a column and I got some grief from Christy Smith's supporters. But he had compared at one point the Biden administration to the Third Reich, talking about the Mar-a-Lago raid. He went and apologized, and I give the guy credit. I only found out about it because someone in the congregation emailed me. No press release. Didn't even return my request for some kind of comment. So I think it was a very sincere one. But that's a race that Democrats should win and should pick up. If they don't, Valadeo's race, he's running a very competitive race in the Central Valley. That's another Democratic leaning race. I mean, in years past, we have run contra to the national trends. Very, very red years. California has been very, very blue. It'll be interesting to see if that holds up again this time. Competitive races in Orange County too.
Yeah, all those Orange County seats. And, I think of those, Katie Porter was, everybody figured she was more or less a slam dunk for re-election, but she's got all this stuff going on now about how she got a free house and from UC and all other stuff. So that, I think that one's closer than people thought. All right, we got to get out of here, but we talked, we've alluded to it a couple times, but election deniers are on the ballot everywhere. I read a piece this morning that there are 552 Republicans running for various state and national offices, and 201 of them deny the legitimacy of the 2020 election. And in the House, there's 118, most of whom have are rated as slam dunks to be reelected. That's scary stuff. And when people talk about election deniers and democracy and all that, that's what it's all about. The peaceful transition of power, the acknowledging that you've lost, congratulating your opponent. These are all things that we've just taken for granted for hundreds of years. But it's all out the window now. I think you mentioned in your column, Laxalt in Nevada won't even say, agree that he'll concede if he loses.
This is very dangerous. Yeah, really dangerous, really scary. And I've thought, I don't want to be a Johnny One Note and keep writing column after column after column. But what I come back to is it's sort of like, if someone looks back on the McCarthy years, they're going to say, I didn't express alarm enough. I wasn't concerned enough. And this is, it's not a partisan issue. This is not Republican versus Democrat. This is not about whether someone wants to raise your taxes or lower your taxes or supports an infrastructure. Like you said, this is foundational, fundamental stuff. This is what our country is grounded in, right? Democracy, the principles of free and fair elections, the principle that individuals' votes matter, and that if you lose, you graciously accept the result, or maybe you grudgingly accept the result, but you accept the result. It does not get any more basic and fundamental than that. And we have had a very, very dangerous turn in our politics, which is to bring it back to Nevada, which is why I said I think voters there need to send a message. It's really, really important they send a message that this is not okay, that this is not just fun and games, that this is just not the usual D versus R sort of stuff. I promise you that if the Democrats had pulled out this sort of stuff, I would be just as vehemently opposed. Fair is fair, right is right, and it is wrong what these folks are doing. And the only way, and I might have said this on this program before, there's no organism on this planet more sensitive to heat and light than a politician. And the only way people are going to knock off this election denialism crap is if they lose. And if they see this as a losing strategy, and if they're punished, then they'll stop pursuing it. And if they do it and they win, they will have every incentive to keep doing it. And I really, not hyperbolically, I really do worry about this country's future if that's the road we're headed down.
Yeah, All right. Well, that's a happy place to leave
I
it.
was going to say that's a really happy note
I'm
to
glad,
end on.
I'm glad we
Go
had this
Giants.
conversation. I feel much better about everything. All right, man. Mark Z. Barabak, the great political columnist for the Los Angeles Times. Read him in the paper. You can subscribe to his newsletter and get it hot off the pixels or something. I don't know what you.
Something like that.
All right, man. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.